All right, thanks everyone for coming. We're just after 9:30, so we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'll go ahead and do roll call. Just please state here or present. So Steve Vicking.
Here.
Michael Von Bergen.
Here.
Al Schmidt. Thomas Rose, his alternate. Mike Warner.
Here.
Jody McCarthy.
Here.
Ryan Valesky.
Here.
Bruce Meyer.
Here.
Gabe Powers. Lori Ryan.
Here.
Alex Strack.
Here.
Vince Moska.
Here.
Spring Duffy.
Ryan Beaver in her place.
Okay, Ryan Bieber.
Al Schmidt.
Al Schmidt is here. Can we mark that? Al, can you just say here or present?
Present.
Thank you. Ernest Varga.
Here.
Darren Olson.
Here.
David Watkins. Daniel Tunyon. All right, with that, we have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and move to minutes approval. Is there any discussion on the minutes approval, or do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from April 9th, 2024? Yes, Bruce? We have from Bruce. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Second from Jody. All right. Do we have any public comment? No public comment? Okay. Any members' comments?
You want to vote on the motion?
Oh, I apologize. Thank you, Steve. All those in favor for the minutes approval for April 9th, 2024? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Steve, once again. Getting ahead of myself. All right, no public comment. Any members' comments this time? No? Okay. All right, so we'll jump into these items that we've kind of been discussing. So what the way that I'll do this is as we go through each one, I will ask that we open it up for discussion, and then we'll go ahead and make a motion to move it over to MCSC for their review. So if there's any topics where potentially there is discussion and you guys feel that we want to make a certain change, we can make the motion to move it over to MCSC with the discussed changes, and I'll kind of outline those as I'm keeping them. If the group is split, then that's okay. Would like to find at least a majority that feel one way or the other, so that way at MCSC I could also at least present that we did have a split and kind of bring it to the committee from that regard. So with that, we'll just move into 5.1, which is the Bolton 75 detention volume versus curve number chart. I think that one, no one really had any discussion previously, so do I hear a motion to go ahead and move that to MCSC committee for their review?
So moved.
All right, by Ernest, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, second by Darren. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Okay, so then we'll move into item number 5.2. Let's get that here for you guys. Don't have it. Now open this up for discussion. So we did make a couple of the changes that we discussed last time, which are related to just having a defined section in the ordinance that talks about being at the status of completion. So we basically just went with these 3 characteristics that would define when a site would be considered completed. Number 1, all disturbed areas of a regulated development shall have the final grading completed in substantial conformance with the permitted plans. Number 2, all disturbed areas of regulated development shall be permanently stabilized. And then number 3, all required as-built plans shall be approved. And then the definition for final grading is still there to give that some substance. So all proposed elevations of the development are substantially completed with no stockpiles remaining. Seed and blanket has been installed for any major/minor stormwater system is applicable in areas with slopes exceeding 4 to 1. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion if anybody has anything that they would like to add or note, make a comment on. Ernest, yes, please, start us off.
The only thing, I'm good with all, the only problem with the definition for the final grading, where it comes to no stockpiling, there are times where there are phased projects. It's all one site, but they've broken it up, and so the stockpile exists, it's part of the project. It's not gonna go away, they silt fence it, they sometimes stabilize it, sometimes leave it a mess, but you might have a problem where it's a phased development with multiple parts to it. It just, as a one that's popping right now, Oregonics, when they did their project,
Yeah.
they stockpiled everything in the far northeast corner. I believe it's still stockpiled there. Yet they're good and going and running, and all of us have said, okay, but there sits the stockpile.
Fair point. I don't know if anybody has.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. Maybe you would say substantially complete with any remaining stockpiles permanently stabilized.
I'd buy that, because
Yeah.
there's somewhere, there just is a stockpile, or the excavator's hauling it off slowly, or they sold it to somebody, or the farmer next door wants it, or whatever.
Or,
And we have the same issues when we're doing them, because the farmers will go, I'll take that good, rich material off the bottom of that creeked area, so it's stockpiled until we can finish it up.
or maybe that's not the best wording, because if it's an active, so I've seen that where they put like a topsoil pit or pile there, and then over time, you know, they're taking it off and selling it or something, but the soil has like a permanent stabilization system around it. You know, so the pile isn't actually stabilized, but there is perimeter controls around it and stuff like that. So I'm not sure the best wording of that, but.
Now, to add to that, on our sites where we are doing that or working with the farmer or whatever, we also have to, we require that they install a rumble device, so that as they're moving in and out, they're not bringing all the material onto the road system. So I mean, you can take it a long way, but somehow the stockpile needs to be addressed, because they're not always gone.
So what if we added any remaining stockpiles are permanently stabilized or as approved by the enforcement officer, to just kind of take all those gray areas and, I mean, clapping?
Bravo. Yeah, you're hearing clapping, yes, yay. Thank
All
you.
right.
Is erosion control blanket required?
So
Because that requires it.
the
Say it that
reason,
way.
so the reason why we have it for final grading is because we get temporary occupancy requests. And depending on the situation, obviously I wouldn't necessarily want to issue temporary occupancy, because once they move in, at that point, it's really hard to say, all right, you gotta come back out. So what this does is it sets us up within the county's process, and then the municipalities can kind of run with it as they like, to where our temporary occupancy requests would be that you're at least at a final grading scenario on the site before we
Just
can issue.
thinking if they put in sod, it's neither seed or blanket. And I mean, I'm not trying to be too quirky about it, but I mean, that says you must seed it and blanket it. And if you do sod, it's so maybe like permanently stabilized, as opposed to requiring essentially requires you to blanket something. And if you, like the MPDS doesn't require blanket, I mean, you can seed it with temporary cover plus permanent cover, so that if the intent is that it's just stabilized, maybe that's a better way to say it.
Would it be seed, blanket, or permanent stabilization?
Sure.
Could be a temporary stabilization. I'm thinking of so many of these large county sites, where you get JCK topsoil or somebody of that nature coming in when they got time to remove all this extra soil. You know, this might be temporary stabilized.
Did you want to pull up the chair?
Okay, if somebody else is gonna come in here.
Yeah.
Over there here.
Please.
Yeah, I can shift over as well.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I got room here.
Well, I think part of what drove this out was, I think it's proven to be a challenge for our department by not having specific language addressing this. And so my recollection is that's why this was brought up in the first place, was to provide clearer language and ensure that the sites are stabilized before we provide that.
Final action permit.
Yeah.
Actually, the word completion in the first line, it said prior to completion of the development site, even though the items below that are when you're completing it. So I don't know if there's a better word for completion, prior to occupancy or prior to approval of as-built conditions, because it says you have to do all of those things before you complete your site, which is logically a little, I'm not trying to be Joy Corona, but oh, wait. I'm sorry.
Well, she's here, she's right there.
What about final completion? Or I'm sorry, final acceptance or final closure, closeout, or?
Yeah, I just want to comment for the reason why we didn't put occupancy is we didn't want to put the burden on the municipalities for how they can declare occupancy with the building permit or certified, non-certified community. So, I mean, I will circle completion. I don't know what the best word would be. So if I can write all these suggestions down and.
The last concern I have is the one job that you're aware of on Washington Street right now, that they're trying to do phase 2. Phase 1 still has stockpiles and dirt about it, of which those are gonna get readjusted during the second phase now.
Yeah,
Stabilized or not, that's what I'm saying, temporary, don't tie it to occupancy permit, because he's trying to close out that first one.
Yeah, so I don't want to have occupancy. I think it's just the idea of completing the work. And so I'll set that one aside just to go back to finish up the seed and blanket. It sounds like it would be seed and blanket or sod or equivalent to sod, something along those lines. Is that?
I think it's a permanent stabilization.
Yeah.
Or permanent, okay.
Yeah, because then that leaves all the options open for them.
Okay. Okay.
Because like right this time of year, you could do seed and you'd be, you know, with pretty good success. So you wouldn't have to have blanket per se.
You're not being prescriptive.
Yeah.
You've got hydromulch and, any number of options.
All of those things. Yep.
So I do want to indicate that the final grading is kind of its own thing here. But we can, because then number 2 does say all disturbed areas shall be permanently stabilized. So I don't know if that's kind of saying the same thing again. And the reason I was going to the seed and blanket was just more so that, like to Al's point, if you do have phasing, but your retention basin is sized for the second phase, and your seeding and blanket, your stormwater management system, that potentially that's good enough to open it if you've got multi-buildings to maybe open up occupancy for the first building as the other ones go in. So I don't know if that's too much of the same, but I guess it's not a bad thing. Okay, I'll keep it like that then. So for those 2, and then completion, I guess I'll wordsmith that one.
Yeah, I don't know if acceptance or something
Well, because in the system, we generally, put that the project is completed, so this would be like, we're ready to close it out in the system.
Prior to permit closeout?
Prior to permit closeout, is that, people like that better?
Closer, yes.
But is that what would you wanna, this would just say things have to be like seed and blanket down, but prior to permit closeout, would you wanna, if they had, native areas, would you wanna, check to make sure that those are actually growing in before you close out the permit?
I think that's where prior to permit closeout, number 2, there, all disturbed areas of a regulated development shall be permanently stabilized. So I feel like if we get too many details, it becomes harder for people to do that. And I don't know, I guess anyone with more of a wetland background, if that sounds good enough.
I guess I'm going to lean toward your way, only because there can be times you try to do a wetland system and you have to redo it. Because certain plants don't take, or you have a weird climactic situation, so.
Yeah, I guess it can start to grow and then it doesn't sustain, so. All right, well, I will change completion to prior to the closeout. What did you say?
Did I say, what did I say? Acceptance or project acceptance or?
Prior to, okay.
I forget now.
All right, I'll put it as closeout. We'll work on that, I guess it's not that critical, so.
Can I add one more thing? I don't know if this
You
goes
can add as
without
much as you want.
But should we put something in here that all the conditions of the permit, or the original permit letter, or, conditions must be met? I'm thinking, what if you have like Army Corps approval hinging on this, or DOT or something like that, just as a way to circle back to whatever special conditions would have been put on the site prior to closeout?
So a 4th bullet point to any other agencies, federal, state, local agencies?
Or even if there were any special conditions listed in your original permit issuance. Do you know what I mean?
No, I definitely hear you.
Just a way to circle back and make sure everything was checked. Because I don't know if you guys get stuck in this fight of if agencies don't want to issue their final approval until the other agency issues their approval.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yes.
I thought it was
We've
just exclusive.
been caught in that loop, yeah.
So, I don't know.
Okay, then, because as-built plans are almost like a special condition, so maybe I can indicate for number 3 that all required special conditions, such as as-built plans or approval from other state, federal, state, and local jurisdictions shall be approved.
You'd mentioned adopting the DECI program too. Is that?
Yes, that's not part of this one, it's on the next
Next
item for discussion. So if there's something in there we want to circle back to this, I guess we can go ahead and do that.
It sounded like, so there's similar language in the DECI inspection criteria. And it sounds like that they match up based on the comments, but you might want to just, for example, the DECI shall conduct inspections until permanent stabilization and enforcement officer approval of appropriate as-built documentation and drawings. So that's kind of, just if you want to word it, the same in this section as in that section, but I don't know if, maybe you want to change that section to more of what aligns the comments were, but I think it's pretty close.
Okay.
Because you mentioned permanent stabilization.
In here, yes.
Yeah. So I don't think it conflicts.
Okay, because what the idea, so these are I mean, this is going to be in the permit conditions section, whereas the soil erosion decking stuff is more of a performance standard that kind of identifies permanently stabilized more. So that was kind of, that's the flow of the ordinance from that perspective. So if we can circle back to this.
Didn't sound like a conflict, I was
Okay.
just, making a comment.
Okay.
The only thing is, I think this that we're discussing now may apply to projects that don't require a decky. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so if you reference decky here, it may be applying to projects that don't require a decky.
That's a good point.
Stoyan, can you pull up that section that we're trying to add this to? It may just help me
Certainly.
see that within the framework of the ordinance.
Context.
Oh, It is in here somewhere. It is here. So this is it. This is all that's related to permit conditions. So it spells out, you can add the special conditions to your point, Jody. Basically retaining plans on site and then making sure that, any deeds or plats or easements are still functioning as intended. So when the county with every permit releases a set of conditions. So that was kind of the driver behind it. Here, I'll just pull it up for you guys.
So this addition would be the fourth bullet point to that section.
Which one?
So what we're reviewing right now would be.
This will be 1, 2, 3, and then this would be number 4. So yeah, thank you, Scott.
Oh, okay.
So, but let me just show you guys, just real quick. What's that?
Oh, no, keep going.
Okay.
Just talking out loud, trying to
All right.
fill the air for.
So this is just our basic language for conditions that go out with every permit. So a lot of this is contained within the ordinance, and this was kind of the starting point where I was like, okay, let me make sure this is tied to actual ordinance criteria. So the problem was this one here. Number 11, in our conditions that we send out with every permit, it's not spelled out anywhere in the ordinance, right? So that is part of the issue that we always have with developers coming in. So this section that we're writing now, and can everybody see that? Do you want me to blow it up? I'll just read it for the minutes, I guess. All disturbed areas of the site shall be permanently stabilized prior to completion of the project or the issuance of a certificate of occupancy or a certificate of completion for any building which is part of the regulated development. So the ordinance didn't really, I mean, you guys saw it right here. I just don't have any reference to that. So that's what this particular number 4 is trying to do, is really kind of bring that together and give it some support structure there. So hopefully that makes more sense, or at least brings the, okay. Anything else?
Not on this.
Okay.
When you were within the ordinance, and I happen to notice number 3, if one has a question, how do they bring it forth as a question for future discussion, not necessarily to bog this meeting down?
You mean leave a question on this one?
Already locked out.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I try, so with the way our agenda works, I try to have kind of either members' comment area, or we can bring it up under future topics.
I'll take it then.
You wanna take it then?
I would like to take it then.
Okay, make sure you don't forget.
I'm making myself a note right now.
All right. Anybody else? All right, so then to move this forward to MCSC, the motion would be to move this forward with the following changes. The first one would be let me go back to, here we go. Would be related within the definition for final grading where it talks about no stockpiles remaining. We would change that to any remaining stockpiles are permanently stabilized or as approved by the enforcement officer. Then looking at the final grading definition again, in the second sentence where it says seed and blankets, we would add or has been permanently stabilized. And then for the third item would be at the very beginning of this, prior to completion, instead of the word completion, using closeout. And then the fourth item would be changing bullet point number 3 to say all required special conditions such as as-built plans and other federal, state, or local jurisdiction requirements shall be approved. Again, not the final be-all, but if that sounds good to you, to everyone, do I hear a motion to move forward with those revisions?
I so move.
Okay, moved by Ernest. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Steve. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. All right, thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and move forward. Number 5.3, performance standards for shore erosion control. So this one we discussed a lot. I thought the best way to open it up for discussion would be to really just take the language and write it in to give it some structure, to give you guys a better, point of attack. We had a lot of ideas floating around, so obviously giving that structure is gonna help bring it together. And I can, again, this is coming from the Performance Standards, Article 6, under Section A. And I'm just going straight off of starting with number 4, where it talks about inspection and maintenance requirements. So what we did was any areas, just in general, any areas where we felt we can hold on to, they're not being changed. So if you see anything that's in black, that's basically standard ordinance language. Anything in red or crossed out in red, those are the edits. So what we did was we went forward this first area. And again, I do want to stress that this is going to exempt our general permits. So when you have things like for single family residences in the backyards, or you have a deck, patio, and some of those smaller components, those typically would fall under your general permit. So they're going to be excluded from the qualified inspector automatically. Just want to provide that clarification up front. So with that being said, we went ahead and introduced, we're not calling it a DECA, but we're just calling it a McHenry County Qualified Inspector. And just real simple to start out with, we came up with kind of 3 options of when we would want this based on some of the discussions that we had. Number 1 would be located partially or completely within a flood hazard area. Number 2, partially or completely within the boundary or wetlands or waters. Then number 3, something that we added, we didn't really quite kind of come to a consensus, but we just, for a starting point, if the development is located within 200 feet of a flood hazard area, a wetland, buffer, stormwater management system, and it would be, the qualified inspector would be required, and then we added the language that the enforcement officer may waive this requirement if there's a vegetated buffer or there's already something in place that would basically minimize the need for erosion control. So, any comments to start out with this section before we kind of move forward? I think that the remainder is probably a little bit more self-explanatory, but. Ernest, please.
4C2, by waters, are you referring to both waters of the US and not, and trying to keep it generic because the definition's still a floater?
Yes, and
Okay.
actually, it's mostly because of how the ordinance is written. It talks about it in that manner. There's other sections that talk about, like this language here. You said 4C, so yeah, like boundary of wetland or waters. This whole flood hazard area, boundary of a wetland or waters buffer area, that was in the ordinance prior. I just kind of stole it.
No problem. I thought maybe it was because the definition's still being tweaked, so, no problem. One other comment on 4C3. In the last line, I would suggest a couple of word additions, because I think it's what you mean. Management practices are already installed and are being properly maintained. Because you're saying they exist already, right?
Yes.
Yeah, not being built as part of this. Okay,
No.
thank you.
Is number 2 redundant, since you have number 3?
I mean, potentially, I
I
suppose.
mean, you've encompassed all wetlands and waters in number 3, which. you have-
So the trick here is that, I guess number 3 was, it can be more open to that discussion of you're not in the wetlands, but potentially you're close enough to where we might want some protection. And that potentially is kind of up for the municipality or the enforcement officer to take a look at based on the proposal, the plans, et cetera. So I'm not trying to be redundant, but number 2 is just strictly if you're in a wetland, you have no choice. Whereas number 3, you're close enough, but potentially it's not warranted. So I wanted to try to make that
Okay.
a possibility.
We have a recent situation where erosion control was not installed and sediment discharged into a fen. And that wouldn't have been encompassed in item 2, but it could be encompassed by item 3. So that's part of the rationale behind that.
Okay, I understand the rationale, which is good. You already had it encompassed, you wouldn't necessarily. I'm not sure what completely within the boundary of a wetland, I'm not sure what development site completely within a wetland means. Sounds like an impact.
Correct, yeah. So you're looking at impact to flood hazard, impact to wetland areas, and then your number 3 is you're not impacting them directly, but you're potentially close enough where, I don't know, you're at the top of a hill or, whatever, we can come up with scenarios, would be the idea. The 200 feet was we didn't really, it's just kind of a number that just kind of seemed to fit. It was kind of like 100 or 200, so I don't know if anybody has any better ideas on that. Is that too broad? Is that too little? Does that sound about right?
That gets into the trick bag of us having to delineate 200 feet on somebody else's property, which is, your ordinance is 100 feet max, probably. MWRD is 100 feet, which is always a dance of looking over the hedgerow and, so 200 feet's getting further out. 100 feet's hard enough, I'll say it that way.
What does Lake County's ordinance say?
I don't know that they have this kind of proximity of a specific, I don't know.
We're supposed to estimate adjacent, but I'm not sure that there's a lineal.
I don't think they give a footage.
I don't think they did, and so that's why we just, we can eliminate that and put adjacent. It just, The other, part of the other discussion that I did want to touch on is we talked about potentially if it's high quality or not. It just seems like the more we kind of do that, then potentially a small development would have to resort to getting a wetland specialist to make that determination, which means they might be spending more money. What's kind of some of the concern is, are all of these requirements now becoming too much of a burden? So we kind of try to eliminate that and then come up with Darren mentioned last time, people like specific distances and numbers, and you can throw a radius on there, and so it simplifies it even further. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of liked the idea, and we felt that 200 is probably good enough. We can send this out to a couple of wetland specialists to get their thoughts.
So the Lake County ordinance, how they deal with that is they separate C3, so their numbering's different, but it says the DECI may be required by the enforcement officer for number 3. And the way they word number 3 is it's less than or equal to 1 acre, so it's below that threshold and has a floodplain, isolated waters or waters of the United States on site or on a downstream adjoining property. So it leaves it up to the enforcement officer, and they use adjoining as opposed to adjacent, because adjacent doesn't mean touching, it means could be way downstream somewhere. But I don't know if that's better or not. I'm just stating that's what it says. But you may want to put, maybe a suggestion is to add the enforcement officer determination for number 3.
Okay.
Well, in McHenry County, unlike Lake, there's a lot of unstudied floodplains. So if you're looking at, I got 2 projects right now on unstudied floodplains towards a new house construction. They're working off a determination from the county from 15 years ago. Are we gonna throw that housing development to a special DECI review perhaps, because maybe simply the erosion fence we're putting in now or snowpack? There's a lot of rural areas in Marengo and Harvard and even Richmond area, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I get a little concerned that, okay, we're gonna tax beyond what the big flood zone has shown. And who knows when it gets developed until a major development comes in.
So the general permit, again, most single-family residences fall under general permit number 2.
So that doesn't follow this then?
So it does not. I didn't tackle that one, something that we can take a look at.
There's a lot of,
I know everybody here felt that the homeowners, it's sometimes difficult to have that in place. So that's why, I did want to clarify, and in my intro, I didn't qualify general permit as general permit number 2 for us is the single family residence. And the reason I also don't want to go in there too is because technically if you're not over 20,000 square feet, at that point you don't even need stamped and signed plans.
and I'm doing 2 plans right now, we're staying under the 1 acre threshold for horse farm facilities,
So
because they don't want to go to the next threshold of stormwater detention.
and there is a little bit of a contradiction here, because if we just look forward to number B that says for developments disturbing 1 acre or more, then it is required. And the general permit number 2 stops at the 1 acre. So even if you're doing a single family residence, it's no longer classified as a general permit number 2. So then it would come under the requirement of needing a qualified inspector. So there's no protection or way to eliminate the qualified inspector for single-family residence development that exceeds 1 acre. So if that's something that we want to explore, we would have to write that waiver in here somehow, for that portion at least. If not, we'll leave it as is. So I guess the way the language is written is, you know, I am throwing the enforcement officer's opportunity in there as opposed to having them review and require that. I guess I'm putting it in a way where they can review and waive that condition, which we can reword that if there's a feeling that might be.
Makes sense to me. My only question is the 200 feet versus something different. And if you're only doing wetland delineations 100 feet outside of the property boundary, it would seem that there could be a wetland 150 feet outside of the property that may not get identified. And so then you would have some potential, not a conflict, but some additional
Overlap.
overlap. So I would almost just make it 100 feet so that way it's consistent with what a wetland scientist has delineated.
I think it'd be better. I mean, it is weird. You got all four sides, and if it's farmed next to you, you need to do a farm wetland determination offsite,
I'm all for consistency, so the 100 feet is great.
That'll capture anything you're worried about, I think.
Okay. Any other discussion about this particular item number C? We can come back to it as well. All right, I have those few revisions, so we'll kind of continue through the document.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
Sorry to
No, that's okay.
dive into this. So what is the definition of waters? Is that doesn't seem to include, is that missing anything? I'm trying to figure out if there's an actual physical water that wouldn't be included in the definition for waters.
Just had a sheet.
So your definition for waters and wetlands is that they're both subsets of waters of the U.S. and isolated waters. So that means they're
Yes.
a component of both of those.
Sure. So, like I said, here's another section here at the end of Article 5 where that similar language appears.
Yeah.
So here is, let me zoom in.
So I think
So it's a subset of, too much. Waters of the U.S. and isolated McHenry County.
right.
That's the definition there for waters.
So all rivers, streams, wetlands, and isolated wetlands then would be covered.
Yeah, lakes, ponds, and streams.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. All right. I think that answered my question. Thanks.
Okay. Sure. I mean, we at staff level, I mean, we get challenged a lot. So we do have a running list of just kind of edits and things. I just don't want to throw everything in here to start out with. So, but by all means, we'll be revisiting and looking at definitions. So. All right, the other edit here on this page is that, again, you can see it just indicated that for acres disturbing 1 acre or more, it said a qualified inspector. In this case, I just changed it to match McHenry County Qualified Inspector, which comes into play a little bit later. So here, just moving along. Okay, still good, everybody follow? So that's just kind of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 items of when, to do inspections, et cetera. For regulated development disturbing less than 1 acre, that does not require McHenry County Qualified Inspector per paragraph 4C above. It just says you can kind of lessen the burden. So just trying to kind of touch up all of these other areas. Inspection reports, I added that inspection reports shall be submitted directly to the enforcement officer. I've had some rumblings from my municipalities that that's not being done for one reason or another.
Is there a difference between the qualified inspector and the inspector? What is an inspector? Is that defined anywhere?
That's what I was gonna ask, if you have a definition for McHenry County Qualified Inspector. We had talked about.
I do.
Have to have DECI or some other erosion control certification from another organization.
I have it down here, because I added it at the end with all the other definitions. However, there is no generic definition for just inspector. So, I guess it could be anyone really. But if we wanted to provide a definition for just inspector, we can do that. Otherwise, it just would be someone that the owner would choose to, take a look at this stuff. They don't need to be qualified.
Could it just be the owner?
That's what I was thinking.
Could be.
I mean, if it doesn't need to be anybody, do we need to say inspector?
Well, so that's why basically I'm just, I don't know, because it was the way that the ordinance was written, specifically section E here, was trying to make the distinction between a qualified inspector versus just anybody just making sure that their site is clean and tidy and they're not causing issues. So I was just trying to kind of hold that similar language more so than really getting into the nuts and bolts of it. But I do think that we probably should have an inspector in here, and that can be, again, it says provided by the applicant, so that could be the applicant themselves or their contractor, or someone related to just keep an eye on things, and more so also be a point of contact and just say, hey, we potentially have a complaint that your stockpile is, off your property, whatever the case might be.
Is there a term or is there a definition for inspector right now, or no?
There is not.
Maybe we just add a definition saying it could be the owner, because if it's all for someone in developments, or his representative, or
Yeah.
techie or whatever.
That's
give
what I
them
was
an out,
thinking. Somebody,
reputable or whatever, somebody that,
somebody designated by the permit owner.
right.
I mean, it is in here, like when you're going through the permitting process, technically that should be provided as part of the permit, who is your inspector. So you don't necessarily want to add too much because it's already in here as part of, you wouldn't have your, I'll put it this way, if we really wanted to, you wouldn't get your permit if we don't have a designated inspector, right? We'd ask for that.
I don't think we've had anything on the permit applications now for that.
Not on the permit applications, but it does come out. So like the actual application for a permit, it's very vague.
Well, that's what I'm saying, I don't think there's any place on there where, well, it's Schmidt Engineering or whatever engineering company is their inspector for that residential construction, unless it's over 1 acre.
Yeah, we can add it to the application.
Right.
Just to have it designated, but usually it'll come out in the comments. And I mean, most of the time, we're pretty laxed where part of the response is, well, I don't know yet. I'm gonna get this out to bid, and then, they don't, and it's 6 months after they've gotten their permit, they're still working on that. And we put it in as a special condition that they're gonna notify us who that person is. Do we follow up all the time? No, we don't, but it's part of the permitting requirements. So to me, it's covered well enough here, and like I said, technically, I could be a stickler and point to this and say, hey, you haven't supplied your inspector to me, I don't know who that is, you can't start construction yet potentially, because it's a special condition of your permit. And you're not meeting the conditions of your permit. Would I ever do that? No, but. So I think that's why, we don't necessarily see it as much, because the other thing is they don't want people to think that they need it right off the bat, because they just might not have it at the time. Even when you're coming in for your approvals, if they don't have a contractor lined up yet, or they're thinking between two, and, sometimes, we get a phone call and say that the contractor won't pull the trigger until they have a permit. and probably the contractor is gonna become the one who's the inspector. So it's just kind of a, you know, I feel like it's good enough here, but we can always come back and add more guardrails if we wanted to. Okay? So moving along, just added that the reports need to be submitted directly to the enforcement officer. The report shall include, I just removed qualifications of qualified inspector. Yes?
With that removal, do you need to renumber after it then?
Yeah, good
So
point.
there's 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't do that.
Yeah, I was just noticing.
Thank you. No problem. Okay, and keep in mind, I do have the definition here of qualified inspector, so I'll get into that. So then we added these other couple of sections related to some of the components we talked about, if there's issues on the site, and really the enforcement related to that. A lot of this, these two bullet points here, or these two items, I and J, were written with the idea that a lot of it, you know, we have this post-construction maintenance plan saying you're gonna do this, you're gonna remove sediment, et cetera. A lot of that same idea was used to write these. So we weren't trying to, again, invent anything, but use kind of ideas, well, if you have a maintenance plan in place and you have sediment runoff, you know, you're required to clean it up then, so you should be required to clean up anything related to construction practices by kind of the same token. So I'll just read through it. At any stage of construction, if the McHenry County Qualified Inspector determines that an ineffective control measure has not been replaced or a control measure has not been installed properly, and any further work is likely to imperil any property, public way, waters of the U.S., isolated buffer area or stormwater management system, the enforcement officer may issue a stop work order until the proper corrections have been made. So that's related to kind of, Michael, you brought up stop work orders last time we talked as a kind of a deterrent. So beyond that though, sometimes what we have is projects that don't get permits and they're in violation and potentially there's some cleanup that's required. So a stop work order, again, doesn't really do the trick there. So this section is related to that. Any property, public way, isolated water, buffer area or stormwater management system that has been impacted by construction work due to a missing control measure, ineffective control measure, or a control measure that was not replaced properly shall be restored. Restoration shall meet all applicable federal, state, and local requirements. Restoration shall take the following maintenance considerations: removal of sediment and debris, stabilization of any eroded areas, replacement or reseeding of native areas is designed by a certified wetland specialist, replanting, reseeding, or sodding of turf areas. So two things I do want to point out. I didn't want to include waters of the U.S. just because Army Corps might have different requirements that we'd adhere to, so I kind of tried to throw in the federal, state, and local requirements. And then items number 1 through 4. Those are basically coming from most of your accepted maintenance tasks that you'll see across all ordinances for stormwater management systems. So again, the idea was if we're doing it for that, then I don't see why it couldn't apply to construction on a development site. So that was the 2 items added. Darren?
For J,
Yes.
we want to, it seems like we're limiting somebody needing to restore like the property or a wetland next to them only if these certain things had occurred, such as a missing erosion control measure, an ineffective one, or one that was not properly replaced. But ultimately, if their site is under construction and maybe we just get a rain event that overtops their silt fence. So the silt fence was in, it was maintained, it was appropriately designed, but it just got overtopped because of a storm event. This would lead them to believe that they would not have to restore that adjacent property.
I tried to cover that with ineffective control measure, and I don't know, maybe that's just not maybe that just doesn't have enough teeth. Because again, trying to keep it simple, it can be difficult. In this case, when you brought up a good example, and there's probably a dozen other ones that we can touch on. So how do we capture those and kind of what makes sense? And I don't know, Ryan, if you want to chime in.
Because that was my question too, because like defining imperiling any property or, you know, if something is ineffective or not. Because I've had issues where I look at a problem and it's a pretty clear, major problem to me, and the contractor goes to me, well, why is it a problem? It's not that big of a deal. So having some sort of definition for when an enforcement officer is allowed to issue that stop work order, or defining what some of these problems are. Because I've had contractors just disagree with what I say is a problem.
And again, there's that ineffective control
Yeah.
measure in there. I just, outside of that and without listing, I don't know,
Yeah.
a ton of, and maybe this is something that, you know, we do have, McHenry County does have a technical guidance document. It hasn't been updated in a long time, but maybe having something to supplement this, to kind of incorporate examples and Q&A type things might be better. I don't know, but who wants to go first?
Do we have to have a, you know, can we just end it at that has been impacted by construction work, period? And leave it up to the EO to determine what that failure was? Because I feel like we're limiting ourselves. Like you guys said, we're limiting it. So can't we just say they've been impacted? Because maybe it's not an erosion, maybe there's other things going on, right? Like ineffective construction sequencing or, you know, something like that.
They drove off into the wetland,
Right.
right? And so that would not be.
Would it be including but not limited to? That way you're at
That
least
would be
providing
better.
some guidance.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you're going to have varying degrees of expertise with your EOs. And so it seems to me that maybe that's the appropriate approach.
Yeah.
I think you're right, you know, you don't want to limit it to certain things but we also can't anticipate every scenario under the sun. But this provides some direction, which is one of the things that I think we felt was needed to provide some guidance, but I think you're absolutely right, you don't want to limit it to this. So including, not limited to, I think maybe covers your
Yeah.
concerns.
So let me try this then real quick, and then Ernest, don't forget your thought. Any property, public way, IWMC, buffer area, or stormwater management system that has been impacted by construction work, including but not limited to, see, that's weird, a missing control measure? Is that, or you want to just get rid of the control measure component?
I say get rid of anything after the word work.
Okay.
Because, I mean, there could be contractor negligence, there could be just acts of God, I mean, who knows?
But whatever it is, you want to make sure it's their responsibility to
Right.
take care of it.
Okay.
Yeah, either way is fine, if you find a way to wordsmith it to say, including these items and any other, or if you just want to, like Jody said, you want to just take these out, I think either way, or add another sentence, or however, that's.
Yeah.
Okay. Any property, public way, yada yada, that has been impacted by construction work shall be restored.
Yes.
Just simplify it. Okay. Like it.
It gives a lot of discretion to the EO too. Yeah. Because you're right, what's to keep somebody from just driving on somebody else's property and mucking it up?
Right.
There's any consequences for that.
Okay.
When you're ready, I've got a similar comment for number I, or
Let me-
for I.
Let me go to Ernest, because he had something. Ernest?
Okay, I had a comment in I, but I also have a separate comment, and it's kind of been,
Okay.
we were bantering it here, but it kind of got highlighted there. When he said, well, I say it's not, and the contractor says it is. What we were bantering was, when you were talking about leaving it to the owner, to the inspector, the objectivity factor kind of gets lost. I mean, no offense, what owner's gonna say, oh my gosh, yes, I'm totally wrong? I mean, they're gonna say, what's wrong? It looks good.
Yeah.
No different than the contractor.
But that's for super small ones. less
I
than-
understand, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying, you just keep in mind as you're doing it, there has to be an objectivity level that the inspector sees and not. But the other reason that I also, I had two other things. Jay got handled by the rewrite you just did. In I, I always have to grind through these because everything seems to fall on it. You use two different phrases and they have different meanings. You use or and, or in the second line and in the third. As it's written, the or says one of the two conditions either side of the or has to be in place, and in addition to that, any further work has to be in parallel. So I don't know if you meant that, or if you meant them both to be ors, or if it should just be the first one, comma, the second one, comma, or the third. I don't know if you're tagging them or separating them.
No, I think all of them should exist, like each one on its own.
On its own, so it's
Yeah,
the
so
first
it's not
one, comma, the
it's not a
second one, comma,
combination.
or the third, okay.
It's not meant to be a
I was like,
combination.
wait a second, do you always have to have the in peril of other properties? So,
Good catch.
okay, it's the first one, comma, the second one, comma, or, and then the third one, okay. I was reading, I was like, okay, so if it's not imperiling the property, then I don't have to do it. Wait, do I have to do it? Yes, I have to do it, okay, thank you.
Thank you for looking into that, because that's the type of stuff that we get.
Oh, yeah, because someone will say, no, it's not imperiling the property, it says so right here, and you're like, wait, whoa.
Yes, yeah.
Good catch.
All right, Michael?
Okay, so, yeah, I think or means and or. And so that's, I think I would agree with that. And means they have to be
Both.
both.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so, the way that I is set up, to me, the way I'm reading it, it says if MCQI determines this, then the enforcement officer may issue a stop work order. So, in my mind, the challenge that you're gonna get is that, well, the MCQI says, oh, there's not a problem, then the enforcement officer can't take any action. So you're almost giving the MCQI authority over the EO, it sounds like. So what I would say, if a MCQI or EO determines this, then the EO may issue a stop work order or pursue other available legal remedies as described in Article 9, Section 1760-090. So that's a pretty good, that's your 1760-090 is worded pretty well. I like the wording in there, and it gives, a lot of latitude on, legal remedies for the enforcement officer, including stop work orders. Like if they go out to a site and it's completely blown up and there's, mud flowing off into a house or something like that, a stop work order alone probably won't, handle everything. That's kind of my comment, is like they might need to, take other legal remedies. And they're described in that section.
What section is that? I apologize.
Article 9, 17.60.090.
Let me get to that just so everybody else is on the same page.
I mean, you're just kind of pointing it back to that section and to every, the full suite of the EO.
So you're talking about in here, Article 9?
Yeah. that section right there.
So to summarize then, it would be at any, so for under I, at any stage of construction, if the MCQI or the EO determines that,
Whatever.
et cetera,
Yeah.
as we defined, or,
Then the enforcement officer may issue a stop work order or pursue other available legal remedies in that section.
Mike, are you asking what the remedies are?
No, they're already described in here. I'm just saying that it doesn't limit the enforcement officer to just a stop work order. It points it back to what, all the things that the enforcement officer can do.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, probably anywhere that it should be scanned and it should just point to this section, anywhere in the ordinance that refers to issuing a stop work order.
should I almost have that as a separate sentence after that? Just to indicate the enforcement officer? I mean, at that point, it's basically I'm opening a violation, which if I do that, it's automatically goes to Article 9, because that's the violation and penalty component of it.
Well, I think the way Michael had it posed, it was you can issue a stop order or go to section Article 9. So the or leaves you the
Or,
option.
okay, or,
Or pursue other legal remedies as described.
Yeah.
In Article 9,
okay,
section
I mean,
17,
or
16.
pursue,
90% of the
legal
time,
remedies.
a stop work
Say
order was
legal.
always the best tool,
remedies
but
under
there are a couple
Article.
other ones. We had to like take an injunction,
Yeah.
something like that against a couple developers.
Or even if it's like multiple failures of the same type, then, okay, the stop work order isn't working anymore, kick it up to the violation.
Yeah.
They want to give you woods and irons in your bag, not just one.
These are all really good points.
Okay, I'm all right with it, that's why I we go through this process and have you guys weigh in, so. All right, so it's gonna say enforcement officer may issue a stop work order or pursue legal remedies on Article 9 until the proper corrections have been made. Would that also apply to J in terms of restoration though? Like if they haven't done the proper restoration, you should, just saying.
It will give you a tool to utilize, or a couple of tools to utilize.
Are you deleting, there's a sentence in there saying restoration shall meet all applicable federal, state, and local requirements. Are you taking that
Oh,
out?
okay, no, I guess that is wrong. So that pretty much covers it,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I thought you're ending it after the word work. Then you would be removing it.
For J?
Yeah, in a previous discussion, there was a,
No, I said, so for J, any property, et cetera, impacted by construction work shall be restored, restoration shall meet all applicable.
okay, so you're not removing
So
all
I am
of it.
just removing the items related to the control measure language.
I got it, okay, I thought it was everything after. Got it, my error.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
Would it make any sense to include verbiage if they commit violations of any of their other permits, that it counts as a violation for the stormwater permit, like if they have an NPDES permit or they have an Army Corps permit, and it's violated something explicitly written in those permits, but maybe not in the stormwater?
It typically will be a special condition or as part of just the general conditions that they're meeting that. So if they don't meet that, then it's already in there where we can open a violation for it. So this is more just the performance standard behind, we've identified a situation where it has led to a violation. And now we want them to potentially clean it up because they deposited a bunch of soil in the right-of-way ditch. So it just didn't have, although I've always had Article 9 that talks about enforcement and everything, it was vague to where it could open it up, especially in the courtroom for discussion, as we've kind of touched on. The owner thinks it's good enough and you disagree type of component. And then once you get into that realm, who knows what's gonna happen. So, okay, then the definition, so I had this up here for you guys. Basically, there was a definition for qualified inspector. So, I just took that and reworded it and made it very similar to our wetland specialist definition. So it flows the same way with the A, B, and C. So basically, if you're gonna be qualified, you need to meet one of A, B, and C. So number one is you're providing basically a statement that yes, you meet minimum requirements and that you are qualified, that you're either a DECI, an SPESC, or CESSWI, which was already contained in the ordinance. Both of those, they both had their own definition here. This is something that I didn't identify, but I was just combining them for both because honestly, it was the exact same verbiage for both. But they were separated, so it's just highlighting that. And then for a DECI, I just pulling the definition from really Lake County here on what it means to be a DECI. And then for number C, this is where someone can provide the documents that they've gotten their training from somewhere that we would consider valid, reputable, et cetera. And that's, again, internally, we would keep that list open for anyone, and we would internally with SWCD, as they review our wetland components, this could be added into kind of our agreement as part of that vetting process. So just real simple definitions. So if anybody, Ernest? Yes?
Not taking away anything, just trying to figure out, since at the bottom where you've put into red the DECI,
Yeah.
about Lake County, should what you have in black between the cross out and the new red, should that also be at the bottom? Because
Yeah.
both of them are covered within
It's,
the red that you wrote out.
Yeah, it's not, this order won't matter, so the definitions, like, since it starts with a C, this one starts with a, they'll be dispersed in the definition section. What I meant to do is I started with qualified inspector and what we already had, and then basically did what wasn't there yet.
Okay, so this is going to be in the definition
It's
section,
gonna
not
be-
in this, not where we're reading right now.
Correct.
Okay, so this
Yes,
is,
that's
okay.
why, yes, so I
Okay.
tried to highlight definition revision.
Sorry.
This is just specific to definitions that would get incorporated in appendix 2 or whatever definitions.
So the person, it should be A and B or C, or A and B or A and C, because otherwise you need all three of them, right?
Well,
And you're saying that,
I tried to kind of define it here, that you need A and then B or C.
The line above that.
yeah.
A,
I know.
or B, and C. Yeah, that one should have an or in it.
A, so where would I put the or? Because then,
Between the A and the B.
so A and B or C.
right? A,
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry, yeah, my, yeah. A and B.
All right.
Okay, got it
All
back.
right.
We all need a English touch-up. I do,
Go for your-
sorry, I'll just speak for myself.
Oh, everyone needs conjunction lessons,
All
obviously.
right, so A and B or C.
Or you could just say complying with the following. Because A, you outline that you need either B or C.
yeah.
Do we like that better?
I'm all about striking things.
Person complying with the following.
Thank you for the English lesson.
Who keeps the list of deckies? Is that something that
We have it on file, and then it's basically on our website, so it's the same thing with the wetland specialist, we just get an email. So that's the only thing that, as I was thinking about this, as I looked at the wetland specialist itself, there isn't real direction on where do I send this information, although people just tend to either send it to me or one of the water resources emails or whatever. So I was gonna keep it as is, but we can define that a little bit better for both areas if we wanted to.
But having that list will drive participation, because people want to be able to do work in town.
how
So,
would you take somebody off the list if they turned out to be a horrible Henry County qualified special?
That's kind of up to Lake County, isn't it? Because they're the ones that issue being a decky or not. That's
So-
Lake County's designation.
Yeah, I would basically bring it forward to MCSC, to the committee, and just outline the fact that we've been having issues with their particular inspections or reports or work or their projects. Type of.
we did talk about it last time, and that Lake County has a 3 strikes rule. I don't think we have any language in our document specifying that, but
No, I mean, if Lake County removes them as a deck, it automatically takes care of it for us. And I think to Michael's point, what we would probably do is I'd probably send an email over to Kurt or whoever indicating, hey, we've been having issues with this particular decky. And probably through some form of coordination with them. Just see if they have them on the radar as well, and maybe that's enough to where Lake County removes them as the decky, which automatically disqualifies them from us, and I don't have to go to MCSC. Some of these other organizations, I'm sure they have someone I can reach out to as well. But that was kind of my thought, was I would kind of potentially report it to Lake County first, saying, hey, I've been having, or whatever municipality, we've been having some issues with this particular decky. Are they on your radar, or anything like that?
Without saying names, has anyone ever been removed?
Oh, I have no idea.
One,
From the decky.
Because I can't think of any, multiple municipalities have lost jurisdiction.
right, so we write the rules just to, it's 80-20 rule. When you write 80% of the ordinance to cover 20% of the problems. But I think that there was just one person
Interesting.
over the whole time that we had to write reports about, and they were suspended for a little while and then got back on. So, anyway. I don't even know if that person's around anymore.
And I think in general, and Ryan, maybe you can speak more to this. I think in general, it's not also necessarily with the decky, but the contractors, we just don't listen as well.
Yeah.
Right?
A lot of the time, the decky can write a perfectly valid report with lots of, hey, you need to fix X, Y, and Z. They give it to the contractor, and it's up to the contractor to fix it or not. It's just because the site's having problems doesn't mean that the decky isn't doing their job.
But it's nice to have the person on site who's writing those reports. You want to make sure you've got, you two are supporting each other.
And that they're sending them to the enforcement officer
Right.
too. Yeah, so that's a good change.
Well, yeah, because I did have someone bring up that they felt like they were being circumvented because the reports were always coming from the contractor. So just to have that ability. All right. Well, I will go ahead then and open this up for a motion to be sent to MCSC for review. There are quite a lot of small edits, so I'll capture some of those, the main ones. So an edit to item number 4C to change the 200 feet to 100 feet. to also clarify language that's under 4C number 3, the enforcement officer may waive the requirements if the vegetative buffer or appropriate risk management practices are installed and being properly maintained. And then under number I, that it can be the qualified inspector or the EO that makes the determination and can issue a stop work order or pursue legal remedies under Article 9 of the SMO.
And then changing that and to or.
And you're right, and then changing the or there. And then for J, we're gonna be striking the language so that it reads, any property, public way, IWMC buffer area, or stormwater management system that has been impacted by construction work shall be restored.
I will so move, adding that in the first line of I, you also wanted to say, if the McHenry County Qualified Inspector or EO determines. And then I'll move that we move it on to stormwater committee.
Ernest moved, Jody with the second. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed?
One addition, sorry. You also wanted to change under definitions,
For the following?
a person qualifying with,
The following.
the following instead of A, B, or C. Yeah, I forgot that.
It's in there, sorry, I didn't highlight it.
No problem.
You know, I thought that was the smallest, okay, so.
I.
Okay. The ayes have it, no opposed on that vote, sorry.
So what's the abbreviation? Is it a MECWE?
Ooh, a
It's not a DECI, it's a,
It's a medley.
We can work on that one.
Maybe it's a Mecky. Mecky,
yeah, I
it's a
don't even
Mecky.
know.
All right, moving on to, where am I? Number 5.4. So the runoff volume reduction and water quality changes, all right. This one, as we discussed the last time, the ordinance, let me just go to that as a reminder. Let me find that. But essentially what I'm getting to is it had basically a water quality runoff component and a quantity runoff component. So what we did here was, what section is that? Article 6B. 6C. Jeez, I thought it would be. All right, well, it was basically combining those two sections into a post-construction management, if you will. So here's the section. So there was a section identified runoff volume reduction hierarchy and a section identified as water quality protection. So what we attempted to do here was try to combine the two. Okay, so from an ordinance perspective, I basically took this number 6 and jumped straight into calling it post-construction best management practices and really removing this. So it was a combination of taking the existing language and now applying it to this little bit of a different idea. And that idea being that again, you can see a lot of this language is being pulled, but in addition to other applicable runoff control performance standards, the following requirements apply to all regulated development, except regulated development authorized by a general permit. So there's that general permit again. And it just goes into now a section A as opposed to kind of this section A here. Okay, so that's kind of the idea there. So PCBMPs are required to treat the stormwater runoff for pollutants of concern and reduce runoff volume for all regulated development. Regulated development with site limitations such as roadway development shall provide PCBMPs to the maximum extent possible. The applicant shall provide the following information for the development site. This is where we had a little bit of kind of discussion last time where we had kind of a camp that wanted kind of some numbers, and we were trying to push it more towards providing information. So the idea behind this is almost mimicking a SWIP, where the SWIP is you're providing that narrative for the construction portion. This is providing a narrative kind of a post-SWIP, if you will. So what we're looking for is a description of the proposed use and activities of the development site and adjacent areas. And then we just give a rundown of some potential activities of concern. Would be things like vehicle traffic for commercial and industrial use, outdoor storage of items, including but not limited to landscape materials, fuel, dump sites, salt storage, agricultural practices, with the exemption of any agricultural land that maintains agricultural best management practices in accordance with the NRCS conservation guidelines and standards, maintenance facilities, gas or fueling tank stations. So those are just kind of some of the broader activities. The narrative would then go further to identify pollutants of concern that may be generated by those activities. So just real simple list from that we discussed last time. That would really be suspended solids, metals and oils, nutrients consisting of nitrogen and phosphorus. Again, if there's something more exotic that we know of that needs to be taken care of, then that's why it's not limited to the following. And then number 3, identification of the PCBMPs for the treatments. And you're basically identifying the pollutant that would be supported by that treatment with data and calculations used to size, locate, design, and maintain that PCBMP. It would get implemented, number 4, as part of a report and maintenance plan. And then number 5, if the applicant can demonstrate that the proposed development would not generate any potential pollutants of concern, or the development contains an existing PCBMP that can provide the treatment for the potential pollutant of concern, the EO may waive that requirement. I think that's the end of the list. Yeah, so I'll stop it there. And kind of focus on this part. So really, ideally, the goal is applicant or whoever engineers just identifying, hey, this is what's happening, X, Y, and Z. We don't need a BMP because of these reasons. And then the EO can say, okay, yep, you know what, that makes sense. That's kind of the goal. I think one of the the discussion items that we had was that some folks preferred kind of a rough, whatever it is, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, a line of this is how much impervious area you're creating, and you're over that, so you need to implement a BMP. And one of the examples that I think that makes sense is that might make sense on a development if it's like a truck stop, but if you have the same impervious area on an ag use where it's just a driveway to a pole barn for storage of tractors, then it doesn't really make sense. So moving away from this kind of threshold idea to allow for that type of discussion to be had was the goal of this first section A. Ernest?
First, great job. Second, two small logistic points. In the small letter A, you make reference to an acronym that you haven't defined. So somewhere above it, just in brackets after either the heading for 6 or the first sentence, open bracket, PCBMP, close bracket. And then the only other thing I noticed is in the first line of lowercase a toward the far end, after concern, there should be a comma because you've got two separate thoughts. They're not grabbed together. Short of that, I don't think I have any other comments.
Okay.
The items under 3, agricultural practices, I'm sorry if you explained this and I missed it.
Well, it's, I guess, a broad scope. It can be, now, keep in mind, this is agricultural practices in terms of you're now constructing, you know, a new facility for some type of ag use. And I think we kind of got into that discussion with Bruce last time. He gave the example of, I forget what you had, but it was some kind of containment tanks that.
Secondary containment. yeah.
Secondary containment that had to go through USDA approval to show how those are being contained. So what Bruce then can do as part of this is say, yes, I'm gonna be storing this, but I am meeting these requirements to show you how this potential pollutant is being contained. And so that's kind of the idea. Agricultural practice, if the farmer isn't doing anything where he has a permit who's just tilling and farming, it would not apply to this. It would be associated with some type of permit. And so the example I gave is potentially a pole barn for storage of tractor vehicles. So if it's a large, we have this happen, it's a large 100 acres and strategically this barn makes sense over here and it's a long gravel pathway that potentially would trigger normal impervious area thresholds. But there's no real concern for any type of contaminant, then they can say, well, this is my use and not have it be a requirement. Whereas if we just had thresholds, you know, they wouldn't have that ability.
I was getting thrown off by agricultural practices that was including some things that potentially weren't regulated by the ordinance.
I could use some touching there on the verbiage, I suppose. I don't doubt that.
So does that only apply in an agricultural situation?
Correct. And it's mainly also the zoning would have to be ag use. Or it would be some type of estate zoning where there is an ag use allowed. So maybe it's instead of agricultural practices, maybe agricultural uses. Again, I'm trying to not send it more towards the zoning component just because of the discussions we've had between municipalities being able to enforce their own zoning. So I was trying to keep it away from that, but really that's what it's going back to, is it's zoning, it's zoned for some kind of agricultural use. Could be related to animals, could be related to farming, storage of whatever it might be, holding area for manure, you know, all of those. And so if they're, and this is where we went to the NRCS, that they already have extensive literature to farmers on, you know, how to best, or guidelines, tips, whatever, what have you, on how to do, you know, if you have livestock, if you have this, if you have that. So we just felt that if they are already in accordance with that, again, they can just simply get that information, it's documented, and just provide it and say, hey, I'm already doing these things, and okay, type of thing.
So all this language is in the ordinance right now?
No, this red stuff? No,
Brand new?
brand new.
Okay, I'm
Brand
just,
spanking new.
this isn't my part of the ordinance, but there's no performance standards for water quality. So I'm just thinking, if I was an engineer,
So,
which I could be.
It's easy.
thought you were
like
saying-
the design standards, like it says, how do you design and size? I mean, what are you sizing it to? Because there's no performance standard. I like the idea, I'm not trying to be, I like water quality, better, better is better. So I just, on a practical level, every site's gonna discharge TSS. I mean, just practically, dirt
This
on
was
parking
still open
lot.
for debate, Vince.
Pardon?
I think this is still open for discussion.
I mean, this is what,
Well, I'm just,
know.
I'm just concerned that there's a standard that's not defined.
There's no numeric standard.
Correct. So like Wisconsin has what, 80% solids removal? We don't have that.
right.
So when you say, are you gonna discharge metals and oils? Well, if you're a Walmart, what do you say? And then how do you tell with a straight face what you're doing about it? I guess is what I'm kind of getting to.
Well, yeah, I guess I'll back up. We had a debate on trying to define a number for, let's say total spending solids 80%. In talking with Lake County, they pretty much said, don't do that. You're not.
I was in many of those meetings.
Yeah. So the way it's written there is to the best extent possible, to the maximum extent possible. So that's why I did have that up here in A, to the maximum extent possible. But you're right, I mean, I don't know, there's, if you go to the Illinois Urban Manual, they obviously have a set of standards. Municipalities can then adopt that, become more restrictive, et cetera. I wasn't trying to point to any one source potentially, with the idea that, for sedimentation basin, there's some practicable design elements to that need to be met. So I wasn't planning on potentially going any more specific than leaving it at this, with an opportunity for the engineer to kind of cite that. The EO reviews it, and I mean, even if we try to put more in, it's still gonna happen, where the engineer's gonna go and the EO is gonna request more, and the EO is gonna, or the engineer's gonna say, oh, I think it's good enough. I just don't know if we can avoid that truly.
What do you consider a BMP other than a detention basin? I mean, realistically, there isn't a lot, rain gardens, bioswales, all those things.
Filter strips,
strips, I
vegetated
mean-
swales, hydrodynamic separators for grease and oil. I mean, really, anything can be a post-construction BMP if it has a specific design to remove a specific pollutant in mind. And that's why we didn't want to say, now, unless IEPA with the MS4 changes comes out and says every MS4 community has to get 80% or whatever, then we'll throw that in there, and I think we have to come back and really look at identifying and providing performance standards to say your vegetated swale exceeding a slope of 5% at 50 feet wide will not provide the 80% total suspended solids. It needs to be a minimum of this or a minimum of that. If IEPA doesn't come out with specific numbers, then Lake County's advice of shying away from that is kind of how I think we need to keep it for now until the IEPA decides, you guys aren't doing a good enough job regulating yourselves, so we're gonna drop some numbers on you. And say you have to be 80% total suspended solids, phosphorus and nitrogen removal has to be, I don't know, concentration, max this, max that.
That's scary, by the way.
Yeah, I know,
You don't know if you're not in compliance unless you monitor, and there's no monitoring requirements, so.
that
Because what was it?
definitely,
8 years ago, what was it, 375 NTUs or whatever that number was for turbidity as a surrogate for TSS? And that was so unwieldy. Like, when do you sample? Do you sample in the first hour of the storm, the 5th hour, tomorrow, it's all different, so it's kind of chaos, unfortunately, when it comes to compliance, so.
For a lot of green infrastructure, there have been numeric removals, and so as part of your application, you can refer to that. At least it's providing an opportunity to address what the potential pollutants are and the PCBM that you're proposing to use to reduce it. Without this, there's nothing.
Yeah, and then what I threw up last time that we met was I forget, I used Kane, DuPage, and Lake, I think, and I just showed all of them kind of reference. Now, as I go further, there is still the language about the 1 acre impervious, and some of that is still in here, but a lot of them are getting specifics, and a lot of the engineers here mentioned the difficulty with DuPage's system, especially with some of those thresholds that are, they have no consideration, they're just a threshold, really. And if it doesn't make sense, you're still required to try to implement something that doesn't make sense. And so this was kind of a fresh take to try to take a first stab at a little bit of a dialogue exchange as opposed to hampering you into a certain situation and providing that ability to at least put something down on paper that says, well, here's some documented, whatever PCBMPs that have shown to be able to reduce this pollutant or that pollutant, and we're following a similar design.
No, and like I said, I like the idea, I truly do, but
Yeah.
it's been a thorn in our side for my entire career almost. I mean, Wisconsin went away from compost and bioswales because it was shown that compost was actually generating pollution as opposed to sequestering. I mean, because of you put compost in your garden because it has soluble nutrients in it. So they've gone away to mostly sand, which has its own issues. So that's what I'm saying, like MWRD requires biosolids. I can almost guarantee you they're providing nitrogen and phosphorus to the watershed because of those biosolids. So when you're going to put in a practice to sequester something that might actually become a pollution source, it just gets sticky. And I'm not trying to be negative at all. It's just it's a practical issue that is not easy.
It's on the design end. I agree that there's some, media changes that need to be done, but I think nationally, US EPA was going towards just a volume capture as a surrogate to all these pollutants. So like, what's your, 80% of the runoff is 0.81 inches or something like of a storm event. Mm-hmm. Because you look at the volume over the course of a normal year, and all the storm events, 80% of them are 0.81 or less, something like that. But you're right. The other end of it is the maintenance and the materials that you're using, because those are only going to be effective for 5 years or something like that, and then they're going to start becoming a source.
Yeah, monitoring is an issue. We are trying to. We do have some ideas on how to move forward with that. But yeah, I mean, to Michael's point, this is great and it's going to go in a maintenance plan, but how do we enforce it 5-10 years down the road that it's still functioning properly? This is kind of the first step to at least getting there. And so what I wanted to do is just move forward to the next section, based on kind of some of the items that you said. We have this area here that kind of mirrors Lake County about how do you choose an effective strategy, and outside of taking some of these items into consideration beyond that, you're right, you're getting into the gritty detail that can be debated both ways potentially.
Got one more question.
Sure, you want me to go
before
back?
you go on, yeah.
Okay.
It goes to what Darren was asking about, I think under A13. So could you also pull up this section on exempted development? in the SMO. Because
Yes.
wouldn't you say for 3, are you trying to get at non-exempted agricultural practices? Because there's already.
No, what I meant by that would be like, as I mentioned, an agricultural practice for storage of your farm equipment,
Right.
which you weren't doing before on your site, or you need additional storage.
So I think that you want to, my suggestion would be to add the term non-exempted agricultural practices, because they're already including, and including agricultural land that maintains BMPs with regard to NRCS conservation guidelines, because you already exempt some agricultural practices from the definition of development.
Well, I do want to stress that technically, the ordinance would read, if you're getting to this section, you're already in for a permit. So if your agricultural practice has been exempt for non-permitting, we're not even having this discussion. So I don't,
I would agree with Mike on this though. My first look at this was that that agricultural practices could be somehow regulated and somehow fall under this. It makes it much more clear to me if you say non-exempt agricultural practices.
I'll add it.
Yeah.
While you're there, can you tack in, I like your wording of use.
Hold on.
So can you do practice?
Hold on. Let me write that one down.
No, I won't.
Oh, there it is.
Yours is in.
Yeah, I didn't
color.
print mine in color, so it doesn't help. Non-exempt. Non-exempt agricultural practice, okay. Got it. Okay, what did you?
You had said, well, should we say use? If you could, in the front of that, say agricultural practices and/or uses. As an example.
Well,
Tomorrow somebody comes in and they have a horse, okay? Well, horses aren't really, I mean, they've gone to the way where they're not really agricultural use or agricultural practice. They're more a use within agricultural. So I liked when you said it 10 minutes ago or whatever it was, so.
I like it too, I just don't want to tiptoe the line. If I start putting uses in there, then it's gonna make municipalities potentially say, well, our use definition is different than yours. I don't know, it was just something that stuck with me that kind of we discussed as a.
See, but we also have all this
Couple of sections
agritourism. Is that a agricultural practice or a use? Yeah, I guess I just liked it when you had it in, and when you said it.
Well,
But that was just me.
I guess we're not defining the use, right? So it still allows the municipalities to define.
Yeah, they can still say, well, that's
Okay.
not in ours.
All right, so non-exempt agricultural uses is what I will change that to.
But
From use to one
practices and/or uses.
And/or uses.
And/or uses. That's my request, I guess.
Okay, if nobody, that's, okay?
I think just for wording's sake, you might say with the additional exemption of blah, 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 because if you're saying non-exempt with exemption,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound right.
What I can say is, non-exempt agricultural practices and/or uses, because that still works, unless the agricultural practice and/or use maintains agricultural best management practices in accordance with the NRCS conservation guidelines and standards. So it's saying non-exempt agricultural practices and uses shall require a post-construction PCBMP unless that practice or use maintains an agricultural best management practice under NRCS. Is that?
That sounds
Yeah, I think you captured it. So if it's exempt, forget it. If it's not exempt and it gets here and it's handled by NRCS,
Yes.
forget it. And if it's all that not, then,
Obviously, this is all gonna come back one more time.
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, I will have that.
Well, I think one of the issues on that for the exempted is with the square footage. I mean, going back to 2004, if you build a grain bin, like, I can't build any more grain bins on my farm because I'm to my max for the impervious,
For detention.
for detention, so then that would throw it back into this. So
Well,
then it wouldn't be an exempted use then, would it?
so it depends though, because if you, so you don't currently have detention.
No.
Right, so you are at your limit of either detention threshold or through the conservation easement. So depending on what you do with your next project, if it kicks you into detention, then your detention basin can act as the PCBMP. Yeah, if that's what I'm not sure if I captured your question correctly.
Well, you were just talking about the exempted issue, and I was just wondering if that would be part of that.
Yeah, it would. I mean, potentially the detention though would be for release rate requirements. But it doesn't necessarily mean that with the development that you have, that there's any potential pollutants of concern that you would have to identify as part of that. If it's mostly gravel area that doesn't see a lot of traffic except your regular farm equipment, et cetera, then yeah, I think there's an argument to be made there that your detention basin really can be for release rate purposes. It still will add as an extra bonus to take care of some of this. But yeah, it wouldn't, this would still be applicable for you to get away from any additional PCBMPs that would be required. Because it's all based on identifying potential pollutant that would be coming from your property. So if you've got those secondary holding tanks and those meet requirements and everything else is covered, then, you know, that would be the narrative that you would be providing to show that you're covered. Okay. Let me just get that in.
No, not a quarter.
All right. We'll go ahead and move forward. So this is essentially, just to tie back to the ordinance. Oh, I lost that, but,
On the previous
oh,
one.
yep,
Do we
sorry.
need, like, under 4, does it need to be reported, the maintenance plan? Where does it get reported?
Yeah, I was just thinking it would be, like, if you're, let's say you've got a detention basin, normally that requires a maintenance plan, then it might be covered there. If you're doing a separate BMP just related to that, it would be the same maintenance plan, but now you're modifying it to only specify the post-construction BMP. Is that what, sorry,
I
I'm not
guess
sure
I
if I answered your
didn't
question.
know where you would record this.
Oh,
Is it just
recorder's
included in
office?
the plans?
Yeah, well, the maintenance plan would get submitted, we would review it, and then it would get recorded with the recorder's office, so it would always stay with the property.
With a plat?
Or a legal description.
Yeah, or a legal description, yeah. So on a plat or a legal description, or if you want to go ahead and use the site plan and have that and identify it and call it out as location A or B or however, as long as it's well-defined. So we typically have a template that we send out to our engineers for maintenance plans that indicates address or pins, or if you want to do a plat to say this location specifically on a 100-acre lot, however they want to do it. and recorded with the recorder's office, so that if the property's sold in the future or whatever, that stuff would hopefully pop up to say, hey, there's some maintenance requirements here that need to be, kept up.
Just one thing to note, I was looking this up. It says, I forget what part of the existing ordinance this is in. It says a maintenance plan shall be recorded for the stormwater management system. The enforcement officer may waive this requirement for minor and intermediate development. So would the enforcement officer then also be able to waive this?
The only way you would waive it is under number 5, is you're basically eliminating the PCBMP altogether. So if you don't need to do one, there's no need to record one. If you need to do one, you need to record one. And the reason why I didn't tailor it to minor and intermediate developments is if you have a potential condition where one that comes to mind is a landscaping business, outdoor storage next to a creek. How are they bringing in the material? How are they storing it? How are they making sure that they're controlling that product? Half the time I don't know what the screening process is. Someone brings in a bunch of dirt that's been contaminated, et cetera.
So that facility may undergo a minor development,
Right.
but no matter what, they are gonna have to develop and record PCBMP.
If it's determined that it's required. If they say, well, we're gonna put a roof over it, so now you're eliminating the potential for rainwater to kind of discharge it away, and you've got those self-containing blocks, maybe they put a gate or something to indicate, then maybe they don't need it. But it's still a good way to just have that owner understand their responsibilities, because a lot of the time it's gonna be designed by you guys, right? And they're not gonna understand some of that, they're just gonna go along with it. So it also serves as that educational tool to allow them to kind of go through that process and discussion and be mindful of that. Now, if it changes hands in the future, who knows, but that's just in general, I don't know that we can really stop that. Okay, anybody else?
Sorry, I have one other comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I have to leave at 11:30, I apologize. It seemed like this is completely silent on infiltration.
So again, I didn't, infiltration would be another PCBMP. I didn't necessarily focus it on there. It does come up here for appropriate pretreatment shall be provided for stormwater runoff directed to infiltration-based practices. That was already in the ordinance, so I didn't want to get away from it, but that's the only infiltration component that's in here. The other thing is infiltration is brought up in another section that references the Crystal Lake Watershed Development Ordinance and references their so it goes kind of back to Vince's point of what are the performance standards for infiltration. So or any PCBMP, so infiltration in particular, we quote the Crystal Lake Watershed Development Ordinance. And I mean, if there's other ordinances or examples that do a good job of defining some of these PCBMPs, I would not be opposed to throwing it in there that, hey, go meet these guys' standards or those guys' standards when you're developing this type of PCBMP.
But it's not required, I think that's what Darren's getting at.
Yeah, or I don't know, it
Required
just
in
seems
what
like it's
way?
such an opportunity here in McHenry County for infiltration.
Oh, to require infiltration?
Or at least
Encourage it.
Encourage it more? It's kind of this number E really that talks about it, that you would want it directed really when you're in the Sierra area, the aquifer recharge area. Beyond that, it is not. And I didn't, I think, I did not get into the whole half-inch capture or over impervious type of thing, just because of the way E is written, but we could look to encourage that more within SARA areas. The only thing though is that, this is real quick, SARA areas are defined in our UDO. And so municipalities would not have the same encouragement for infiltration within SARA areas. So we'd almost have to put some language out, which they might not identify SARA areas under their zoning uses, which was kind of part of the rub that we had. So we just kind of tried to tiptoe that a little bit and just leave point E here about being in the SARA area. And this would be really unincorporated areas because municipalities don't recognize the SARA area, or if they do, then kudos to them, but.
10 years ago, Lake County was gonna require infiltration. And then through discussions, it's like, this county doesn't infiltrate, so we can't make, because it's, east of the Fox River is very different than west of the Fox River.
Right.
So encouraging infiltration or as a priority, that's fine, but, it's just.
Site specific, yeah.
In Wadsworth, you're never gonna infiltrate.
It's my understanding, and some of you guys may have been part of this before, but it's my understanding that we had actually looked at including a requirement in the past. But one of the concerns is regards to chlorides. So if we're requiring permeable paving, then that is a direct vector for chlorides to get directly into the stormwater. Now, I would like to be using the tools that we have in place, like we have three-dimensional mapping of our geology in Montgomery County, where you could use that to identify areas that are appropriate for infiltration and that are not, particularly for parking lot runoff. But that's getting into a lot of complexity. But if you guys were around when we were considering the infiltration as a requirement, I'd be very interested in hearing your discussion on that, because I've only gotten this second and third hand.
It's not linear, you can't really require infiltration everywhere because you maybe don't want a gas station parking lot infiltrated, right? I mean, water's gotta go somewhere, but maybe not directly straight down, so it's not easy. Right. And chloride's a bummer, because
It's just as an FYI, it has been added to the comprehensive plan as a recommendation. Where that's going to go, that's anybody's guess, but reinvestigating infiltration has been something that's been brought up.
I think Al may have had something.
Yeah, Al, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, this is all great discussion, but I think we could go another hour on this, and we're at 11:30. I'd like to discuss this more at our next meeting if it's possible. Kind of try to wrap up where we're going with this.
Well, and so honestly, the rest
I
of
do
the
have to
ordinance.
go like Darren does, but it's just.
All right. Well, can we mark that Darren has been excused? It's okay. Well, I guess to wrap, because I do want to wrap this up at least. The rest of the ordinance, really, this stuff that I eliminated, it really talks about the water quality components, which is the PCBMP section does. So if no one really has anything else, then.
On the recorded maintenance plan, do public road developments need to do one? Because it's implied that public road development would need to do a recorded maintenance plan.
No. Because it's in the right of way, so there's no real assigned PIN address, if you will. So it's kind of a gray area, honestly, and also it's a jurisdictional kind of component that comes into it, but no, they're not required at this point. If they're using, I don't know, Ernest, if you have any examples of you guys using any property that wouldn't be considered right-of-way.
See, when we take right-of-way, as you said, it kind of falls out of the PIN system, it falls out of the recordability short of dedication. And so it leaves that realm. I'd say, I know of none, so I'll say that. So that I don't know of any instance. I would like to say one thing, though. if what Al made as he departed, or as he was out to depart, I think there are a couple more issues here. And I know your push was to get all of this to stormwater. I don't know that we shouldn't hold this one off till our next TAC meeting. Push the other three, the other 1, 2, 3 forward, but this one, I think it needs a little more discussion.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, that thing I was saying, I don't mean to convolute, but part of that would tie into also the recording thing. So I'd like to, and I can brief you later, I don't want to keep everybody's time, but I think maybe this one should be held on to for just a little bit.
Okay, well.
So I guess I second Al's motion, abstentia, or whatever you want to call it.
Maybe you make the new motion. We'll have some-
I so move that due to some questions and some underlying possibilities, that the item 5.4 of the agenda be held over until the next TAC meeting and not be sent to the Stormwater Committee for review and approval.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so Ernest with the motion, Brian, okay. I'll open it up for any discussion. Okay, then all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. So we will go ahead and
Someone needs to move to
do that. Hold on, real quick.
Thanks for making that motion.
We'll move on to new business. We didn't have any new business, or nobody wants to bring up. Ernest, I think you were gonna bring up a future topic.
It's gonna phase into the other discussion
All
next
right.
time, so I don't have.
So then, just a quick, item number 7, quick update on the comp plan. Brian brought it up. We are getting close to being able to identify our watersheds and putting together kind of a structured section by section area that we'll be working on and having you guys look at and digging, more deeply on. So with that, if there's no future topics and no one has any announcements they'd like to make, then I will entertain any motions for adjournment.
Motion for adjournment?
Okay, Mike Warner, motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
From Mike Von Bergen. 2 mics. Mike Warner with the motion. Mike Von Bergen with the second. All right, well, that is, thank you so much, everyone.
By the way,
So you're dead.
no, it's not dead yet, but I'm just saying, I don't think
My wife.
he's not in charge.
Yeah, he's not pulling your charge. You're right.
Stinks.
The last 30 days.
By the way, your surge strip is defective.
It is?
Are you pulling a charge? Flat tire.
I guess not. Okay, well.
You said, not that I was the engineer. She was shaking her head, and I was like, no, you give it the illusion of how good Brian,
Give you the illusion of providing